welcome back to another episode of the One of Us podcast. Today, we're finishing off our counterculture series with something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about this research study that has been circulating the web regarding Christians, faith, young adults, just what's going on in the statistics in terms of people entering the faith, leaving the faith, and maybe some encouragement for us and how we can encourage our brothers and sisters in Christ to just stay strong in their faith and their relationship with the Lord ultimately. So Juan, why don't you give us a little summary, maybe start us off with some statistics that maybe we can discuss.
Thank you, Crystal. Thank you for that warm introduction. Yeah, so what Crystal's kind of talking about, we're going over a really famous research article. It just came out sometime in March, so by the time you're listening to this, maybe a couple months after, but it's a Pew Research journal. It's about the study of how people who grew up in faith kind of left their childhood affiliation, whether they were atheist or Christian or Buddhist or Jewish. And there's just a lot of kind of information to unpack there. And I think it serves really well because I think we can really inject some of what God stands for against what the culture is really saying today. And basically, one of the highlights of this study, it got data from 36 countries, but one of the biggest highlights is that in the United States, for every one person who went from an atheist or non-Christian background that converted into being a Christian, 6 people left the church or left being affiliated with Christianity.
I think we are moving into a culture that doesn't really value religious affiliation, but rather values spirituality a lot more. So people who grew up in the faith, that's a very generic phrase, a generic term. We don't really know what that means, but I think people are just moving away from being affiliated to specific church or group, and they just are going into the blanket statement of, I can still remain spiritual but not remain committed to a specific church.
You know what, though? I think what makes that a little bit more difficult, too, is like there's so many denominations, and I even wonder how much of that has to do with it, too.
Yeah, the study didn't specify like what denomination, just if you affiliated as a Christ follower.
Yeah, actually, Tati, I was going to ask that too, because I was like, there's obviously Christianity, but there's a bunch of denominations, whether that's Protestant, it's Pentecostal, or just there's a ton. But I want to kind of add, I think a reason, and this is just my own guess, I think a reason that a lot of people are leaving the faith or leaving Christianity is because there's a lot of, for me, like, there's that quote, like, it's all about relationship, not religion, and that's why Jesus came, like, to break that stereotype of religion, which is what the Pharisees were doing, where it came more about pleasing the people around them than it was about pleasing and honoring God. And I think sometimes it's hard to, or I think sometimes, we've all fallen into that at one point. And I think a lot of people have fallen into that, like, you have to do this, you have to do that. And if you step out of line, there's no going back. And because in the sight of man, you've done wrong, you're done. Rather, I think if they taught from the other side, they would see that God is full of grace, is full of mercy. Because I can say I walked away from the faith because I grew up kind of like that mindset is like, okay, what is the pastor going to think of me if I do this? Or, what are my parents going to think if I do this? And so I was so terrified to fail or to make a mistake or just do anything because I was like, I have to be perfect. But in that, I made myself so anxious and so fearful just to do anything in life. And that actually pushed me away from God because I was like, if this is who these people are serving and they want me to serve that God, that it's too much. I can't do that. But when I came to find Jesus for myself, I started to understand that's not what he's about at all. And so I actually learned to embrace making mistakes and learning what I need to do after I make those mistakes. And I found that God is actually a very gentle, very simple, loving, graceful, and merciful God. And I think a lot of people don't see that side of it. And so I think for the people that are walking away from the faith, you can't base your faith and relationship off of someone else's faith and relationship. And I think a lot of people do that nowadays. But I say if you actually dive into the Bible and just spend some one-on-one time with God and ask questions and dive deeper, you'll actually be able to see the truth of who God is, and you'll know that he is a consistent, constant, good God.
I do feel like a common issue too is sometimes I think parents mean well, but when they, I don't like to say force the religion down, but sometimes they do get kind of in like what Vic is saying, the mindset of this is right and wrong, like more the religion aspect and less of the relationship aspect.
And this isn't to like tear down parents, because at the end of the day, I also want to kind of take their side, because they're also probably like, I want my child to know God, because to not have faith in God and to not know God or to believe in God, they're not going to come with me. They wouldn't be able to join me in heaven or know the goodness. And so I think sometimes they push because they want you to experience and know the goodness of God rather than just explaining and helping them to understand. And so I want to take kind of both sides. Like, I don't want to be like, yeah, parents suck.
Yeah, well, I like what you guys are saying here. I do think any form of legalism is at play because kind of like what you guys are saying, kind of framing the beginning point. It's like today when people say they're Christian, it's like you don't even know what that really means anymore because there's so many, I wouldn't say denominations almost, but different sects of religions that say that they are Christian, where I would make the argument that they're not. I like that you guys are talking about the family aspect because there was actually data in the study about families. So in the US, for every person that identifies as Christian, 6 people that no longer identifies Christian, out of those 6 people, 73% grew up in a Christian home, while the other 27%, so like 30%, say that they didn't grow up in a Christian home. So that means majority of people that are walking away from God actually are coming from homes that are quote unquote Christ-centered families.
You know what, though? I think what's hard about those studies is they're very simple questions, and sometimes it can be more complex. Because back then, before I was a Christian, like my parents weren't religious at all. We never went to church. But because I always said I was culturally Catholic. So if you were to do a survey and ask me, like, did you grow up in are you a Catholic? Yeah, I was Catholic, but I knew nothing about the religion. So I think that's the only thing that's difficult about some of these surveys is I feel like it's very surface level. And I feel like there's a lot of people who, how you said, like there's a variety of different types of Christians. There's probably a lot of people who didn't really even go to church, but still call themselves Christians because their families did.
You know what we really need is like we need a Christian org to be behind like some of these research polls, because I do think it would be interesting to see, not just because I mean I've seen some research about every denomination of church, right, where like how many people are affiliating and unaffiliating, and even those numbers are low. But I think definitely they need to include more Christian scholars to kind of differentiate what do people mean, because Christian is such a blanket term. But go ahead, Crystal.
I think too, even if it's going from people who just would before say they identified as a Christian or Catholic or whatever, and then are going to be like, actually, no, I don't identify anymore. I still think that's significant because it shows a societal shift. Even if, like in your situation, Tati, where you said, I would have identified as a Catholic, I was not a Catholic, I was nothing. I was not a Christian. I was not affiliated with Jesus, but I would have identified as that. That still shows something where it's like, we previously lived in a society where people wanted to identify with faith regardless of where their faith was at, but now we live in a society where people are no longer interested in doing that. They're not interested in just being affiliated or putting something down just to say something. Like they're flat out being like, no, like I don't affiliate with any belief system at all. And I think too, part of the shift and the divide, I think, is like the insurgence of social media and media in general. Because if you think about, what do people portray Christians as? Bigoted, like people like, with the bigotry, the sexist, homophobic, judgmental, like all of these things. And people are seeing that as being the displaying of Christianity. That's what's being pushed, like hateful, hateful people. people are moving away from them, but that's not the truth. I just think it's this lie that is just being portrayed, and so people who may have identified with Christianity before are now being like, no, like I actually want to reject that completely. I don't want maybe, you know, fear of man sort of thing and to fit in, because nowadays you are going to receive some backlash if you're promoting your faith. People are going to think you're one type of way when you're really not.
I will say I was definitely thinking of politics. I feel like politics definitely has a huge play in it, and the way that certain views talk about certain religions. Because sometimes, like, when you look at both sides, they're very different in the way that they talk about things. So it's very interesting for sure.
Yeah, I even think politics could be its own podcast video, because I think there's a lot of even misconception when it comes to politics and religion, because I think something that a lot of political parties do, I mean, this is just what I think a lot of political movements do, is they try to have this thing called identity politics, where it's kind of like saying if you are Christian or if you are a certain race or if you're a certain gender, that you have to vote a certain way. And I think that when you clump God with a group of other people, whatever side you say you're on, you kind of are also saying that somehow God is okay with other things, but God is so above those things. So I think it's just kind of like trying to address the misconceptions in that.
I think what's cool too, Juan and I were talking before this, he was like, I'm the exception to the rule, and you, Tati, as well. But, you know, Vic and I grew up in faith, and we found ourselves either staying in faith or coming back to faith. But like Juan and Tati very much grew up in homes that were not affiliated really in faith. They claimed to, you know, have like this Catholic background, but in real life there was no like practice of faith in their homes, and then they found faith later on. So some of the statistics that Juan is going to share actually shows how rare that is and what's happening. And I think it's important to note as well, Juan, that, you know, you may be listening from a country that's not the United States as well. We're going to link this article in the bio. Feel free to go look at your country and see what the exact statistics are. Some countries were a lot worse. I think we were looking like Italy. It's like for every one person that joins Christianity, 30 people leave, like sort of thing. The United States were at 6. Some countries were the opposite. I know Juan's going to get into it. Less people are leaving and more people are joining the faith as well. So go check out your country to see kind of where you guys are at in these statistics.
Yeah, so this study is very interesting, of course. And right now we're talking to the U.S. audience, but I guess I can open it up to a broader sense, because there's a lot of data impact. Age groups that Tati was kind of alluding to, different areas. This study did cover 36 countries around the world, so it's not completely worldwide, but it is covering majority of the industrialized nations, where I guess most of this media sharing platform begins. So out of the 36 countries, 5 of these countries that had the biggest drops in Christianity are all actually in Europe. It was Italy, Germany, France, Poland, and Spain. So these countries in Europe like are seeing like double digit, and it's not like they're converting to Catholicism. I think that's what people get lost in the study. The study actually 100% specified if people are identifying with faith and not. So in these 5 countries, people are saying that they were Christian or they grew up Christian, and now they are no longer Christian, but either atheist, agnostic, or quote unquote nothing in particular. So for every one person in Italy, for example, the number 1 country with the most drop in Christianity, for every person that says, I was whatever before, now I am a follower of Christ, 30 people are saying, I grew up Christian or I was a part of the church and I no longer identify with Christ, which is like crazy.
I think it has to do with wealth. With industrialization comes wealth, comes this idea of like individualism. There's a lot of cultural things at play, but I think countries that have a lot of wealth tend to move away from faith because it's what the Bible says. It's because when people reach this point where they're like, I have all of my needs met and I am the authority or the God of my own life and I set my course, I establish my fate, I am in charge of all the things You know what I mean? And I hold everything in my hands sort of thing. When you get to that point in society, when people move into that mindset, they really think, I no longer need God, because they become their own gods of their life, which is like very scary and dangerous mindset to be at.
I find that just interesting because most of us either reconnected in the faith in college or became a Christian in college. It's just like an interesting statistic.
I know it's kind of funny, but you know what I will say though is that being in higher education, I do think for some reason if you believe in God, it's like frowned upon. I don't know why. I just feel like there's always this pressure. Like I think everyone just wants to be very face value. And I think that some of that is a little hypocritical because why would you help someone? Like if you go to a teacher and you say, why would you help kids? Like what's the whole point of it? And I think most people in higher education settings want to boil this down to, well, it's better for society, but I think they're stealing morality from God. Like the reason why you want to do good is because our Father in heaven called us to do good on this earth. So I feel like when I say that, for some people they think that's dumb, but I think that's the most important aspect of why you do anything.
I think too there's a really big push in like college and university settings for like moral relativism. So alongside what you're saying, Juan, there's also the push of like everything's okay, everyone's the same, your truth, my truth, everything's subjective. And so when that's a push and then that infiltrates their faith belief system, they're like, oh, and that just crushes all faiths. Because if you believe in moral relativism, you can't believe in any faith. Because Islam, Buddhism, Christianity, all the faiths are saying, I'm the right one. So you can't say everything is right and subscribe to a belief system so then they leave, which is wrong. There is no moral relativism. There is a truth and a truth giver.
So something that was a very big characteristic when it comes to Christianity was for some reason, compared to women, for every one woman that left being affiliated with Christ, 3.6 men left being affiliated with Christ. So what you see here is that in every country, right? Not just the US, but in every country, there's like this strange exodus of men leaving faith. And obviously, like as a guy, I have my own thoughts, but I guess I want to open up the floor for you ladies to kind of express what you think of that.
You know, it's an interesting one. I would say I do feel like it is kind of true. Just because I feel like when you go to church or when you go to like the young adult functions, or and I saw that in Reno and I see that here, there tend to be a lot more women than there are men, which I think is really sad because I think men are really missing out on something.
You do definitely feel that like gendered difference. Maybe it's the role of a man that men aren't wanting to fulfill. And it's not standards that women put on men. It's standards that God puts on men. And I think we just live in a society where men don't want to live up to that role or that calling that the Lord has on their life. And so it's easier to just be like everyone else, because there are responsibilities and things that we're called to do as women and as men. And so I do think it's sad. I think it's definitely an attack on men. I think there has been an attack on men for a while now in different ways. In spiritually, there obviously is an attack on men where men are not fulfilling what they need to or not being the men of God that they're called to be. And then also just an attack on like masculinity, what it means to be a man and things like that. So now we have men that have become more passive, men who have become not the leaders in their home, not the spiritual providers, which is just really, it's not the design, right, that God has. And then on the flip side, you have women who are really like passionate, who are trying to like really go after it with the Lord. And then you end up being in this like kind of toxic cycle where like sadly the woman is the one having to like be in charge of things. You know what I mean? I'm even thinking of like young adults groups and stuff where it's often the women that are putting things together and being in charge and being like, let's do this thing, let's have this event, let's go here, let's go there, let's go after Jesus together. And it's the women being the one doing that.
I mean, Crystal and Vic, you guys both touched on it really well. I think honestly, the main thing is that, God is sovereign and he created, the family unit, he created marriage, and he created church governance, right? So I think there's truly like spiritual warfare against men in this area. I think the enemy knows that if he kind of destroys the family unit, destroys how church government works, destroys how institution between men and women are, then I think he will succeed mostly on people just like leaving the church. And I think, this should be a wake up call for any man. I'm not advocating for like barbarism, right? Or like, oh, you're a man, suck it up. Like, you have no feelings and women do what you're told. Like,
Guys,
I think that's like,
guys just need to learn to jog it off. That's it. Simple solution.
Vic, okay. Anyways,
That's an inside joke.
what I'm trying to say, is that like I'm not advocating for those, I guess, quote unquote toxic behaviors. What I'm advocating for is just like both sexes can be passionate in God's calling. Like I think there's this weird misconception where like men feel like they can't live up to this calling because it's too tough. Therefore, they're just going to take a more passive role. But I think the crazy thing is like even if you're trying to live up to your calling in church or in your family and things are tough, it's like God already put us in community to recharge, to feel loved, to feel supported. I mean, you watch old timey shows, right? Like Little House of the Prairie or Bonanza, or like even just like older shows, right? The premise of a lot of these old cultural driven like cities that Christ was such a big influencer on is like there's like people like suffering, they can't feed their families, and it's like men coming together helping each other in a tough time. And I think nowadays, this is why I think in industrialized nations, I think why it's so low is that people are kind of just out for themselves. Like there's no love or grace. It kind of reminds me of that passage. I believe it's in Matthew 21. We read it in church also recently about kind of people's love growing cold. I think that when Jesus was saying like, when everyone starts doing what's right in their own eye, things start going down south and people start like following lawlessness, that lawlessness leads to people's love growing cold. And I think that's true. I mean, I remember one time we had this like urban plunge in San Francisco, right? It was like one of the second poorest area in the United States. Everybody there was helping each other. Yes, everyone was poor. They smelled like pee and poop, of course, but everybody loved God. Everyone's praying for each other. Everyone's like, I have scraps of this food. Let me share it with you. Hey, are you cold? Here's half of my ripped blanket. Like, it was like people's love showed. And then we walked, I kid you not, maybe not even like 20 minutes north to the richest area or one of the richest areas in San Francisco. And like, not a single person would bat an eye at you. And like the amount of like cursing and like bad wishful thinking that people had for one another was insane.
This might be an indicator, this like difference that you've pointed out, Juan, in this study with men and women, I think is a large contributor to who is staying in the church and who is leaving. Because I remember being told about like these statistics and I just found them. Obviously, they might be different in different research papers, but it says here when only the mother attends church in the family, there's a 15% chance that the children will once they're grown. 15. So that's very small percentage. When the father is the only one that goes to church in the home, there's a 55% chance that the children will when they're grown. That is a huge percentage difference. And then when both parents, it's 72%. So that's like really drastically different.
So, what I find super interesting about this is actually the other day I was scrolling on Instagram and I saw a post saying men are turning to Christ more than ever before. And I just looked up some other statistics, and there are some that are saying that there are more men within the last couple of years that are turning more to Christ. So it's just, I don't know. I feel like the statistics stuff can be difficult sometimes because it depends on where they're getting like the sources.
Yeah, and it's hard to say like
population size.
Yeah, it's hard to say like where in the cities they're going, what states, what group of people they're talking to. There's a lot of factors that play into it.
To be fair, this is a Pew Research journal, so like if we're talking about like if you want a gold standard of a study, like that's pretty high bar to kind of like reach. But what I will say is just anecdotally, right, just us four here, I think we've all come to agree that we see in our day to day less men active in church and less men active just in their faith.
Okay, so I kind of remembered my point. So you guys were talking about, people coming to Christ. I will say on my TikTok and Instagram, there are a ton of videos of people sharing their stories of them coming to Christ, and it's people that are, whether they're trans, whether they're gay, whether they grew up in the faith and walked away and came back. And I feel like a lot of those things are not always advertised, but I love seeing different people's stories and them being able to reach an audience that maybe us in this group can't reach. So that's why I was going off of the point of, like, it's hard to know where they're getting these statistics from. Like, who are they asking? Where are they going?
Statistics.
I know I couldn't get it out. But where are they going? Who are they asking? And wherever it is. But I was like, but I do believe, like, God is moving, and I think he's moving in a big way. And so I don't want to say, or make people afraid the church isn't growing. I think it is growing, but I do think this is definitely a call to go out and share your faith. And I know we were talking about earlier some of how sometimes, we're not really sure and stuff, but, about our identity, but be proud of who you are and what you are, and the fact that you are a Christian, the fact that you do believe in Jesus.
I mean, I'll say this, in the last year, I do see that, there's more of a cultural shift of kind of rehearing Christians, and I think this is like our window, right? This is what the whole series is about, is countercultural. I think there's so many people out there that want to find meaning and truth in whatever society. And when I say society, I mean like empty lies that the world throws at them. I think just in the last couple of months, maybe half a year, I see so many, especially young adults, trying to seek truth, right?
And I do want to say, like, 1000% God is on the move. Like, this
God
conversation
is
wasn't
on
to
the move.
be
On the
on the
move.
move.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Oh, I'm proud of you. Anyways, this conversation wasn't meant to be, like, discouraging by any means. Are we moving into a state in the world where we know persecution, we know what's happening, we know what the future holds? The Bible tells us what it's going to look like, that it's going to get challenging out there, that it's going to be more difficult to be who you are. But God is on the move and doing big things. And just like Victoria was saying, I come across things all the time as well. We are seeing people who are Wiccan turn to Jesus, and these big names and people who are sharing their testimonies to hundreds of thousands. Yeah, we just wanted to encourage you guys. Like, the world is moving, the world is shifting, but like what Vic was saying, be strong in who you are in your identity in Christ.
All right, guys. So this is going to conclude our counterculture series. I'm so glad you guys listened to our series. If you missed an episode, go back. It's all really great topics. We were going over a lot of Jesus's parables. And, today we just felt that we had to kind of talk about how culture impacts our faith, just what God's really doing out there, and how, I pray that some of you out there, all of you, feel encouraged by this series. But right now, we're going to shift over to our favorite segment, Hot Take Time with Tati.
I don't know if this one is considered a hot take, but maybe. What do you guys think about eating breakfast for dinner?
I think that's solid.
What are we talking about?
Like, would you
Pancakes?
eat eggs, pancakes for dinner?
Yeah, what the heck?
I'm going to say absolutely, but I'll say this. It's unacceptable as a late snack. Because I meet people who are like, oh, I'm going to eat breakfast for dinner, but they're like having a bowl of cereal at 11 p.m. That's not dinner time. You know what? I'm actually going to say breakfast for dinner is a no for me, because every time I've had a bowl of cereal, it's like 10 p.m. That's like a dinner. That's like a late night snack.
Okay, here's my thing. Breakfast really isn't that healthy. Stereotypical American breakfast is really not good for you. So if you're eating breakfast for breakfast and breakfast for dinner, where are your veggies? Where are your fruits?
What if you
Where
do a
is
veggie
your
omelet?
good meats? Like, what's happening here? All you're having is pancakes, waffles, French toast. No.
But
I'm gonna
those
have to
cinnamon
decline.
toast crunch at 10 p.m. slap.
But if it's like if it's like, oh my gosh, like once a week or once every 2 weeks, like we're just gonna have a cute little like
Okay,
breakfast for
what's
dinner.
your favorite
That's fun.
cereal? Hands down, growing up. Go.
I like Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
Hey, let's go. 2 for Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
It was a toss between Trix and Fruity Pebbles.
Ew,
Ooh, Cocoa
Trix.
Puffs.
Did you like Trix when they were actually fruits? Remember when they were actually fruits and then just make them into orbs?
Yeah, they were like little flowers and everything.
I was
Cocoa Puffs were good.
absolutely
Cocoa Puffs were
obsessed
good.
with Pops.
Ew, Crystal, that's
Which
like being
one?
obsessed with Raisin Bran.
Pops.
Which
That's like the
heck
nastiest
is
cereal.
Pops? I don't even know.
Exactly.
Are
It's
you
like
okay?
yellow. It's just yellow cereal. Like
Okay,
literally
and
the
also
yellow.
Honey Smacks. Everyone watching on video,
Ew.
these. Let
This
me
is
show
why
you my
Crystal
other
has
one.
stomach issues. It's because of these
Everyone
cereal
stay
choices.
tuned. Pops.
Crystal!
That's sad. That's a sad.
Guys,
Cereal
I grew up
choice.
in El Salvador. This was my like.
You should have
Ew.
went to Pizza Push.
Guys, this is the hot take. This is the hot take. I just found it.
Go.
For everyone not watching and only listening, there is crumble cereal.
I just saw that. I just
Oh, that looks
pulled it
pretty
up right
good.
now.
What are our thoughts
Dude,
on this?
crumble cookie is like the most highest caloric thing I've ever seen. I've never
I
ate
know
one,
it
and I'm
is.
so
I'm
proud
not
to
trying to
say
They're
hate
that.
little
on
Okay.
mini cookies that are
I will
cereal.
say crumble cookies are amazing. But one
I think
bite.
they're 2,000 calories for one cookie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why they
That's
say
like
they
a
have
full
those
meal.
cookie cutters where it cuts it into quarters for you. Yeah, just take one bite of one because that's enough.
Okay,
Crystal,
for everyone
I love
watching,
you, but
these
you're all done.
giant bags of Golden Puffs, which are the same as the other ones I said,
I'm actually scared.
are what my mom would get.
You should have went to Pizza Push instead.
Oh my god.
No, but here's the thing. I don't know if this is a Cuban thing or not, Tati. I forget what it was called that she would make, but she'd make a milkshake with those and grind those.
I've
into
never had that a day in
like-
my
Crystal,
life.
this is where the stomach problems began.
Okay, Crystal's all done.
Got no one to blame but yourself.
You gotta have some veggies in there. Name one
Avocado
breakfast
is
veggie other than avocado.
Avocado's
None.
a fruit. It's not even a vegetable.
Sometimes you can.
Whatever.
Oh,
It's a berry.
wait, tomatoes are
Some people
considered
put-
fruits now, aren't they?
I think they're more
Yes.
fruits than vegetables, yeah, because they have more sugar.
But they're not. Like, they're not really. Avocado
Some
and tomatoes.
people can put arugula on their avo toast.
That's freaking
No one's
arugula
doing
lasty.
that.
My grandma, I don't know how she got this idea, but she would get Ziploc bags, put eggs in there, tell us to fill the bag with all our veggies, and then would put it in a pot and boil it,
Nope.
and that would be our off.
Absolutely.
Boil it in the
Plastic.
bag?
In the
Plastic all
Vic,
over your
that's
food right
BPA.
there.
Microplastics, you know?
Oh my gosh, Vic.
You know what the trick is?
Is that why your nose is so tiny?
I'm not
You know what the
insulted
trick
by
is?
that.
Forehead.
Look,
The
Oh,
trick
that's
to
why
make
her
the
toes are
omelet-
so tiny.
Her
The trick
toenails.
to make the
Go ahead,
omelet.
Tati, go ahead,
well,
Tati.
this is the way I do it. I do mix the veggies with the beaten eggs, and you cook it slow. You can't do it at a high temperature. You do it slow. That way you can flip it, fill in what
I
you
don't
want,
have
and
time
then you
for that.
fold
That
Tati,
takes
are
like
you
2
an Iron
hours.
Chef? Iron Chef Tot.
it. Maybe.
Tati, what was that laugh?
That's
That's like Justin Bieber in that one video when he's
I like your
making
laugh.
When he's
fun of
laughing
it.
like Squidward.
Anyways, so for you guys, I'm gonna say this: counterculture, cancel Vic. Thank you. Anyways,
All right, everyone. Well, unfortunately, that's it. That's the end of our episode. That's the end of our countercultural series. But don't worry, we're always going to come back, and we're going to come back with something better. So stay tuned. But until then, be safe. Know that we're praying for you guys. Know that we love you guys. And we will see you next time, okay? Bye.
Bye.